very far into Job. And Job, dealing with the problem of evil, is kind of a big chunk to bite off. How about if I change my mind? Let's have a look at some of the Psalms. Those are easier because they're shorter compositions. We can get 2 or 3 in the time that we have remaining, rather than try to tackle a big one like Job. So let's do that. How about let's do Psalms 8, 22, 39. Does anybody see a mathematical pattern here? 822. Good, because there isn't any. My favorites, right? We'll do those. Here's Psalm 8. Beautiful psalm. If you happen to have a Bible with you, I hope that you'll look along. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence your enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you're mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them little lower than God, and crowned them with glory and honor. You've given them dominion over the works of your hands. You put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes through paths of ocean. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. One thing you notice about this psalm right away is the fact that the initial verse is repeated at the end, right? It starts off with, O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And it ends with, O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. This is not a complete sentence. It doesn't have the subject and a verb. There's direct address, O Lord, our sovereign, and then there's just an exclamation. How majestic is your name in all the earth. After you get this first verse, you then have a reference to his glory set above the heavens, this reference to out of the mouths of babes you founded a bulwark because of your foes to silence the enemy and the avenger. But then in verse 3, you get a reference to the author gazing up at the sky. When I look at your heavens, the work of your hand, I always imagined a guy laying out in a meadow at night. Did you ever do that when you were a teen? I remember doing that. There's something about the night sky that just makes your mind think about immensity and eternity and all of these larger than life things. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established. Notice he calls the heavens the work of God's fingers. Here he is looking up at the biggest thing in our experience, all of outer space, and he says that is merely the work of your fingers. If God's fingers made all of that, how big must God be in relation to everything? It's an implication of God being so much more immense even than the whole creation. I think the syntax is interesting here also, because he starts off with what's called a temporal clause. It's the word when, referring to time. When I look at your fingers, the work of your heavens, the moon and the stars that you have established. Come. So what you ought to get next is a then clause, right? When I do this, then this happens, or then I do this. But you don't get the then clause. Instead, he starts off one sentence, when I look at the heavens, and instead of finishing it, he's so totally blown away by creation and the Creator that he starts a whole new sentence. His mind is just kind of shot into another chain of thought. And the new chain of thought is a question. When I look at the heavens, look at your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have, what am I? Is your mind full of me? What is a mortal that you care for him? Isn't that true? God's got all of these whirling worlds to juggle, and yet he cares about each one of us individually. Not only that, but he has made us a little lower than himself. Here we are at the pinnacle of creation, with everything else put under our feet, given to us. What's he referred to? You've given us dominion over the works of your hands. You put all things under our feet. All sheep and oxen, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the air, the fish of the sea. Everything that passes through the paths of ocean. So, not only does he care for this minuscule particle of dust in the immensity of the universe that we call Hahn or never, but look at how richly his gifts have been lavished upon us. You've made us a little lower than God, and you crowned us with glory and honor. Consequently, when the first verse, which was at the beginning of the poem, is repeated at the end of the poem, even though it's word for word identically the same, does it not now have a richer content because of the speculations and the thoughts that have been intervened? Yes, at the beginning, he was aware of how majestic is God's name in all the earth, but having gone through this sequence of thoughts, he now knows how majestic is your name on earth. Don't you think that's meaningful? Let's try another one. This is Psalm 22. Rather different. That first one is kind of a poem focused on creation. Every psalm in the book of Psalms is simultaneously a psalm and a poem and a song, because every single one of these was set to music at one time. In fact, the book of Psalms is actually the hymnal that the ancient Israelites used in the temple service back then. You know, when you go to church, in the back of the pew in front of you, there's this book, the hymnal or whatever. Some book called We Celebrate or something like that, with a collection of songs in it. We have the words remaining, we no longer have the music. But all of these were put in music at one point. Maybe that's one reason why they make such good songs nowadays. Oftentimes the songs that we sing in the church nowadays have these psalm verses as their lyrics. Well, here's another one, Psalm 22. Oh, I just noticed here, in between the title, Psalm 22, which is added later on when we decided to number these lyrics, and the beginning of the psalm, when the psalmist himself speaks, I have in italics here a little instruction. It says, to to the leader, according to the deer of the dawn. What that means? To the leader, according to the deer of the dawn. I think this reflects the fact that this used to be set to music, right? The leader would be the choir leader, just like the guy over here on Sunday mornings who directs the choir, plays the piano, or woman as it may be in your church, I don't know. This is simply telling that the melody to be used with this lyric is the one that we call the deer of the dawn. Isn't that a nice image? Even in our present day hymnals, not every set of lyrics will have a melody with it. Take a look next Sunday. Look through the collection of songs. You'll see that usually you'll have those 5-line statements with the words in between them, but occasionally you'll just have a set of words. When that's the case, it'll usually say up the top what melody it's supposed to go with. For example, there's a melody that you're all familiar with. It's called Old 100. Does anybody know that? I noticed a couple of weeks ago in the Missal psalm book that we use in my parish, there were the words for it, and it simply said, text so-and-so, melody, Old 100. And the words went like this. See if I can remember the words. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him. The rest you know.
I don't remember. All creatures here below.
Exactly, all creatures here below. Now that's the melody, right? We are as familiar with that melody as they would have been with Deer of the Dawn back then. So all you had to do was write in here, hey, choir leader, use Deer of the Dawn. This will go well with that. So, but unfortunately, we've lost all those melodies. We'll never know. Anyway, this psalm begins with a rather familiar statement. The psalmist says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Well, where have we heard that before? Jesus, right? Jesus on the cross said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Lo and behold, he was not making that up out of his own mind. Jesus was actually quoting one of the Psalms when he said that. But of course, back when the psalm was written, 500 BC or something, we have no idea when any particular psalm was written. The fellow who wrote it presumably was not hanging on the cross. He was just in some kind of bad situation. And so he says to God, why do I feel as if you deserted me? Why have you allowed things to get so awful? My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? From the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. And by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Isn't that a nice image? The Israelites sing, their melodious voices go upward, and God is enthroned upon their singing voices. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted, and were not put to shame. But I am a worm, and not human, scorned by others, and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver you. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. That's in quote marks. This is what the mockers are saying that it's fulfilled. Yet it is you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth. And since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. I suspect that his decision to refer to his ancestors and their relationship with God was in part to remind God, look at the terrible straits that I have fallen into. How can you let this happen? Don't you remember how you helped out Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and so on? I'm of the same stock as they. In you they trusted and were not put to shame, so I'm putting my trust in you, God, therefore do not let me be put to shame. I suspect also that these references to his having trusted God all along. On you I was cast from my birth. You kept me safe on my mother's breast, etc. is another indication to God or reminder to God that he has no other person in whom to trust. That he relies upon God, and therefore God should not let him down. Then you get some kind of metaphorical descriptions of the situation that he's in. See if you can figure out what the problem is. Obviously something's wrong. Stock market crashed or something. If something terrible's happened. Can we figure out exactly what it is? Here's what it says. Many bulls encircle me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. I don't take that literally. I don't think the guy's a matador or something, but is this his woes that are being called bulls? Or is this a reference to those guys that were mocking him? But these words that they encircle him also. I'm not sure. Many bulls encircle me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up like a dusty piece of pottery, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You have laid me in the dust of death. Dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircles me. My hands and my feet are pierced. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. Wow. That certainly sounds like what happened to Jesus, doesn't it? Well, holding off a second on relationship of this poem to Jesus, what about the guy that initially wrote it? Can we figure out what the situation is? Do you think maybe he's got a terminal illness? I mean, some of it sounds that way, doesn't it? All my bones are out of joint. My heart is melted within me like wax. My mouth is dry. You've laid me in the dust of death. Maybe that's what the problem is. Maybe he's just very, very ill and worried that he's going to die. On the other hand, that's a fairly stereotypical description. You find descriptions like that in lots of the Psalms. And so you sort of get the feeling that maybe this is just a metaphorical way of describing any dire situation. The guy's bones may not literally be out of joint. He may not, in fact, be suffering from a dry mouth or whatever. These may be simply a description of a person in dire distress. I'm in dire distress, therefore I apply that description to myself. In most of these poems of lament, as they're called, the ones that describe some kind of dire situation, you can never be really sure exactly what the problem was initially, because you're never sure exactly how much is literal and how much is figurative. But anyway, we know he's in dire straits. Now, certainly this last statement, they divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they have lots. That's And now that I notice that, it occurs to me that there's a couple of other spots that were similar to Jesus' situation. Obviously, the initial line, my God, why have you... There's two. My God, why have you forsaken me? Casting lots for his clothes. But there was also that line just prior to it which said, my hands and my feet have been pierced. That may have been some metaphor for the initial guy, but it's not a metaphor for Jesus. There was some other one there that... Is it verse 9? Yeah, we got to turn them. Because I got approximately going to have yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe from the Holy Spirit. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Well, it's certainly applicable to Jesus and Mary, although it's not distinctly within. Was there anything else distinctly within? Oh, I know what it was. Exactly. My mouth is as dry as a dusty piece of pottery, broken pottery. Yes, isn't that one of the things Jesus said? I thirst. Yeah. Thanks. Good. Wow. So we got 4 remarkably close correlations between the description of Jesus' passion and this psalm. Let's keep our ears open and see if there's any more. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. All right, now there you got basically the first half of Psalm 1. And everything has been said by the psalmist from a position of deprivation. Like he's down here and he's asking God way up there to pull him up to a better situation. Heal this illness or cure my financial problems, whatever the difficulty may have been. At this moment in the poem, however, the psalmist totally shifts tone. And instead of sounding like somebody who's down here desperate, all at once he sounds totally confident. In fact, he even sounds as if his salvation has already occurred. Take a look at where we stopped. He ended by saying, save me from the mouth of the lion. And then all at once he says, from the horns of the wild oxen, you have rescued me. That's past tense. You have now rescued me. I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried to him. So, what are we to think of this? Are we to assume that this fellow was in dire straits and he grabbed a pen and a piece of paper and wrote the first half of the psalm and then set it aside? Sure enough, over the next 2 weeks, his fever broke, whatever. Suddenly he's in great shape, and I remember that psalm I wrote, grabbed the first half, and now, referring to the past tense, since salvation has now occurred, he describes it as having already been. That's a possibility. However, as you read the Psalms more and more, you discover that this is a fairly frequent device in them. What the psalmist is doing is expressing the thorough confidence that he feels that God is going to lift him out of his situation. I am so confident that you're going to lift me out of myself, a situation that I'm going to just describe it as if you've already done it. And I will describe what I will feel like and what I will say to others when you fix my situation. So my guess is, although I don't rule out the possibility of something having happened in between the verses again, I think it's much more likely that this is a kind of a literary arbitrary device to express, even in his dire situation, what it's going to be like when he's out of it. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear him. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. Well, I doubt that the healing of this one particular individual Israelite is going to cause all the ends of the earth to remember and turn to the Lord just because this guy got his health back or whatever. But I don't think that's the point the psalmist is trying to make. I think he's suggesting that the God who cared about and healed little schmuck like me is the one who is in charge of everything and who deserves the praise of all the families of the nation. Here's the last stanza. To him indeed shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it. Well, it certainly ends on a much more upbeat swing than it started off with. You start off with, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it ends with, posterity will proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn. In this second half, did anybody notice any particular correlation to Jesus' situation?
Sword with dogs.
Excuse me?
The sword and the dogs.
Sword and the dog.
Well, the crucifixion, body is left and was eaten by a dog.
Rather than put in the tomb?
That was a Roman practice. To leave the body on the cross.
Oh, but in Jesus' case, wasn't it that he was put in and the stone was rolled over? Oh, but as a general principle, that would have been the case. Yeah, okay, I can see that. And the sword, like a Roman sword. Yeah, gladiators. Excuse me. Yeah, what about deliverance itself as a motif? That's not a precise detail, like throwing dice with the clothes or that kind of thing. But what about this bit which says, to him all who sleep in the earth will bow down. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him. I doubt very much if the psalmist who wrote this poem in 500 or so was thinking about himself being resurrected after he died. What he was thinking about was, I escaped death. God healed my terminal illness or something like that. I will live because he's intervened and helped out my situation. But when you think of this in terms of Jesus' situation, that line really pops out, doesn't it? Because that's exactly what happened. Even though he went ahead and died, Jesus could say, I will live for him. And even the final verse, future generations will be told about it. That has certainly come true as a result of Jesus' death and resurrection. And they will proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, which is us, saying that he has done it. Proclaim his deliverance, even the etymology of Jesus' name. You know what Jesus' name means? Yeah, God saves. So proclaim his deliverance. Jesus is the major manifestation of God's deliverance in history. So it seems to me, instead of little details like you get near the beginning, it broadens out into this even more significant correlation. So The poem, I think, has to be read in two ways. You can pluck it out and read it just as a poem all by itself. What would these words have meant to the initial author in 500 BC or whatever when he wrote them? And that's one legitimate way to read the poem. But this Psalm 22 is not just an isolated passage. It's part of a larger whole, namely the whole Bible. And it has to be read within the context of the whole Bible. Now, once you put it in that context, you cannot help but notice these striking correlations between hands and feet pierced, casting lots for the clothes, etc. I thirst. Now what about Jesus? Here is Jesus hanging on the cross. Last afternoon of his life. Handful of disciples back there watching the goings on. He has a final opportunity to teach them before he dies. The famous last words of Jesus. There's supposed to be 7 words of Jesus. I don't recall what they all are. One of them is I thirst. One of them is, my God, what are you doing? Into your hands I commit my spirit is another one. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. If he's only got 7 last little sentences to say, why did he choose to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? We always assume that he simply knew that, right? Just by itself. He felt forsaken by God. But we now know that this sentence is not something he made up, it's a quotation. Jesus would have known it was a quotation. He knew the Old Testament quite well. That's demonstrated throughout the Gospels. The disciples would have known it was a quotation. Ancient Jews back then, that's all they did. They did not watch novels and all this stuff we do nowadays. They studied the Bible. They knew that would have been a quotation. And they knew what it was an allusion to. He's referring to that passage that starts, my God, why have you forsaken me? You know, back in ancient times, there was no chapters in the Bible. So, in the book of Psalms, for example, your text would simply have started with the first word of the book of Psalms, and it would have gone straight through into Psalm 2, into Psalm 3, all the way down to Psalm 150. With no indication of where one psalm stops, and another one starts. We figured all that out since then. So the only way to refer to a passage back at those times was to say, as it is written, such and such. And that you'd give the first line of a passage, and then everybody would say, oh yeah, I got that passage that starts there. And then that would remind them of the stuff that follows it. Could it be that what Jesus was in effect saying as he hung there on the cross was, hey guys, go check out Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? And why would he have wanted to remind them of Psalm 22? Well, for one thing, the shocking correspondences with his own situation. Those are certainly striking, and they bolster my faith when I think of God having prompted somebody to include those details 500 years before they happened. That's pretty amazing. But even more, I think Jesus would have wanted them to think of the psalm as a whole. Yes, the first half starts off, my God, why have you forsaken me? And yes, it's written from a position of being way down in the pit, needing to be thrown out of it. But how does it end? My disciples? It ends with salvation and resurrection. And I will live for him. So I truly believe that by saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus was not despairing. On the contrary, he was pointing out to the disciples that this is not the end. You wait and see.
really a good prophetic word, but it's a small wisdom.
It's kind of a prophecy in a way, isn't it? Yeah. And Jesus occasionally himself will quote a psalm as a prophecy, as a prophetic book. Not often, rarely, but occasionally will. This is fairly unusual in the book of Psalms, but it's so striking I could not pass taking a look at it. Well, we can either have time for one more, or we can do some questions and answers. I'll leave it up to you. What would you prefer? Do one more? Oh. Well, is this a happy song? Or a sad song? This is a sad song. Again, we have somebody who's in a pretty bad situation. And once again, it's difficult to know exactly what the problem is. He says at one point, Lord, let me know my end. What is the measure of my days? Let me know how fleeting my life is. Is he in danger of dying soon? Is this a terminal illness, perhaps? Or is this just a kind of a generalized way of saying, look how desperate my situation is. If you don't help me, I'm going to die. Something like that. We're not quite sure. At any rate, something terrible has happened. His wife has died. His house is burned down. He's got a severe disease. We don't know. But something terrible has happened. So how does he start off? Well, he starts off making a resolve. Even though these terrible things have happened to him, he decides that he's not going to complain about it. And he says, right at the beginning, I said, I will guard my ways that I may not sin with my tongue. I will keep a muzzle on my mouth. You know what a muzzle is, like on a dog? I'm not going to allow myself to say nasty things to God because this terrible thing has happened to me. So, I was silent and still. I held my peace. Nobody was to know what. My distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me. The more I thought about it, the more the fire burned, until finally I spoke with my tongue and I said, Lord, let me know my end. You've made my days a few handbreadths. My lifetime is as nothing in your sight. Surely everything stands as a mere breath. Surely everyone goes about like a shadow. There's several metaphors here that are used by the poet. Let me know how fleeting my life is. He already knows life is fleeting. He says that life is a few handbreadths. Here's a handbreadth. Don't they use these in at racetracks to measure the size of horses? They measure horses by spans. We just call it a span. 17 spans high at the shoulder or something. Well, that's not very much. 3 or 4 inches right there. A few of these, and that's it. That's your life. My lifetime is as nothing in your sight. Everyone stands as a mere breath. Wow. See that right there? Totally insubstantial. There's nothing to it. Our life is like a breath. Surely everyone goes about like a shadow. Another image of insubstantial entity. Now, he's obviously violated that decision that he made at the beginning of the fall, that he wasn't going to blow off steam at God. Consequently, we can graphically represent, I suppose, what has happened here by suggesting that he started off down here with calm emotions, or apparently calm emotions. I will not sin with my mouth, I'll keep a muzzle on, therefore I was silent and still, but it was to no avail. The more I thought about it, the madder I got, until finally, his emotions erupt, and he says to God, how can you let this happen? Let me know the length of my days. However, he once again gets control of himself. This happens, it seems to me, at my verse 7, following. After having said a bit about my life is but a few handbreadths, everyone goes around like a shadow or a breath, he then says, and now, O Lord, what do I read? My hope is in you. Sounds to me like he's realized what he's done and therefore grabbed control of his emotions once again. Deliver me from all my transgressions. Do not make me this morning with thee. I am silent. I do not open my mouth. So, if we want to continue this graphical representation, I suppose at verse 7, he comes back down and gets control of his emotions and decides he's going to reassert this resolve that he has, that he's not going to speak out against God. I am silent, I do not open my mouth. Does he maintain it this time? No. He blows it again. Because right after having said, notice I am silent, I do not open my mouth, he says, for it is you who have done it. Uh-oh, you shouldn't have thought about that. Because thinking about that gets him mad at God again. Remove your stroke from me. I'm worn down by the blows of your hand. Boy, when you chastise mortals in punishment for sin, you consume like a moth what is dear to them. Everyone is like a threat. So once again, it seems to me, having tried to reassert his resolve to stay silent, his emotions explode again and he spouts off to God. This takes us through what is my verse 11. We get a third, it seems to me, attempt by the poet to get control of himself. And this is in my verse 12. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my cry. Do not hold your peace at my feet. That's a calm kind of mood that sounds very humble and reverential and pious. So it seems to me that he's once again, after exploding, remember that explosion? For it is you who have done it. That was in verse 9. In verse 12, we're back down at his attempts to retain control of his emotions. Hear my prayer, O Lord, give ear to my cry. Do not hold your peace at my feet. For I am your passing guest. I am an alien, like all my forebears. Once again, he starts thinking about how dire his situation is. I am a passing guest. And here you are. You live in eternity. You watch millions and millions of us live along underneath you. But me, I'm just a passing guest here. Not just a passing guest. I'm not even a citizen of this country, meaning the universe. I'm an alien. I don't even belong here. I'm uncomfortable. There's a term for this in modern philosophy. Alienation. You've heard existentialists talk about being an alien. I feel alienated. That's how I feel. I am your passing guest, an alien. And not just me. I'm just like all my forebears. I am your passing guest, an alien like all my forebears. My dad was in this rotten situation that we call the human condition. And my granddad was in this situation, and my great-granddad. Well, this is too much for him. This vision of all of his forebears having had to put up with the same rotten human condition that the rest of us are now living in overwhelms him, and it sounds to me as if it leads him to a nadir. Turn your gaze, the final verse says, after he says, I am your passing guest and alien like all my forebears. Turn your gaze away from me, that I may smile again before I depart. That's a pretty heavy thing to say to God. wish you would just not even notice that I exist for a second, so I can at least smile one more time before I'm done. The implication is that you can't smile when God is noticing you because God's going to get you. Is this any way to talk? Do you suppose that shortly after he penned that last word, lightning bolt came down and turned him into practice? Is it any way to talk to God? It is honest, that's for sure. Have you ever been mad at God? Oh, come on. Of course you have. All of us have been mad at God at some point or another. Have you ever been mad enough at God to let him know that you're mad? I hope so. Because if you're capable of being mad at God, but you're not able to express that to God out of fear, what does it say about your relationship with God? Let me give you an analogy. I've been married now, I got an anniversary coming up in 2 weeks. That will be my 24th wedding anniversary. So I've been married for over 2 decades. And I remember back to when we first got married. Newlyweds, enjoying each other. Every once in a while, I would say something that would irritate her. And I didn't realize, because I didn't know her well enough yet, exactly what pushed her buttons and what didn't. So I was still in the learning process. And so I was kind of careful, because I didn't want to disturb our relationship, or harm it in any way. So I was kind of like walking around on eggshells, being careful. Nowadays, 2 decades later, we let it all hang out. Well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Not that we hurt each other, but because our relationship has gotten so strong, it can withstand anything. And we're totally comfortable with each other. She's mad at me, she lets me know it. I'm mad at her, I let her know it. And there's so much more indicative of a deep relationship than what we had back at the beginning, when I at least felt I had to be very careful that she was doing. So in a way, I don't think this is blasphemy, even though he's very, very angry about it. It says some very nasty things. It is very honest, and there's a kind of an admirable intellectual honesty to it. Besides which, I don't think he would have said these things, or had the courage to say them, if he didn't already have a loving relationship with God, and feel secure enough in his relationship with God to say things like that. Now, hopefully, he thought about it the next morning and said, last night when we were having an argument, that's not the end of his relationship with God, I hope. But it does indicate, and this is part of Scripture, right, that it's not necessarily wrong to express your emotions to God, even though they may not, by conventional piety, be what one should be expected. Oh, there's so many more wonderful passages here, just in the book of Psalms, which we cannot possibly do, but just to give you a taste of the sorts of treasures that there are in the wisdom literature section of the Old Testament. This is just Psalms. Job is a magnificent book. Proverbs, wonderful. Book of Wisdom is one of my favorites. So I hope that maybe during the summer or whatever, you'll have a chance to dip into some of these books and discover the treasures that are there. Thank you all very much. What's the next one?
29th.
29th. And that'll be prophetic book. Thanks very much.